When explorer Elias Vance discovered a Cold War blast door buried behind Idaho's frozen waterfall, he expected to find an abandoned military bunker, but the pressure gauge was still pegged at maximum, 50 years after it was sealed. Something inside was still contained, still alive, and the needle had just started to tremble. What he found in that logbook would force him to choose between the truth the world deserved and the silence that might save it. But before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The bolt snapped with the sound of breaking bone. Elias Vance watched the rusted steel head tumble down the ice face, disappearing into the white void below. For 3 frozen seconds, nothing happened. Then he felt it. A subtle exhalation of air against his face, chemical and wrong. The breath of something sealed that had just found its first crack in half a century. "Eli, what is that?" Lena Novak's voice cut through the wind, sharp with the kind of fear that came from recognizing something that violated the natural order. "A door that should have stayed closed," he muttered, pressing his gloved hand against the steel hatch they'd just uncovered behind the frozen waterfall. The metal vibrated beneath his palm, not with wind but with machinery, active machinery, in a place that had been abandoned before Lena was born. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here. Not now. He'd come back to these mountains 3 years after the accident, after the lawsuit, after watching his former partner's wife spit in his face at the funeral. David Chen had died because Eli made a call. Keep climbing despite the weather. Push through to the summit. Ignore the warning signs that mountains always give before they kill. The avalanche took David in seconds, buried him under 30 feet of snow while Eli watched from a rock outcrop 20 yards away, safe and useless and alive. The guilt had driven him out of commercial guiding. No more clients, no more responsibility for other people's lives. Just solo wilderness surveys, fire watching, the occasional search and rescue when the Park Service begged. Solitude as penance. Then Lena Novak called. "I need someone who knows the Clearwater Range," she'd said on the phone, her voice carrying the brisk efficiency of academia, specifically the Silent Falls area. "There's a magnetic anomaly up there that doesn't match any geological survey. I'm a geophysicist with the USGS, and I have funding for a 2-week survey expedition. Your name came up as the only guide who knows that terrain." "I don't do guided tours anymore," Eli had replied, already moving to hang up. $40,000, she interrupted. "For 2 weeks. I need topographical expertise and wilderness survival support. You'd be a research assistant, not a guide. I take responsibility for my own safety." 40,000. Enough to pay off the settlement to David's family, the last piece of his debt. Enough to finally close that chapter. "I'll do it," he'd said, "but we follow my protocols. No exceptions." Now 5 days into the expedition, staring at a Cold War relic that pulsed with active power, Eli understood why the mountain had brought him back. Not for redemption, for a choice that would make David's death look simple. Lena stepped back from the hatch. She didn't move. Her dark eyes were locked on the steel surface, her mind already processing, categorizing, theorizing. At 34, Dr. Lena Novak was everything Eli had left behind. Ambitious, curious, driven by the belief that knowledge justified risk. She'd spent the last 3 days taking magnetic readings, soil samples, and core extractions, each measurement deepening the mystery of why this unnamed canyon showed industrial-scale ferrous deposits. Now they had their answer. Someone had built something massive inside this mountain, something they'd buried so deep that even the magnetic signature barely escaped. "This is why we came here," Lena said, her voice trembling not with fear but with excitement. "This is the source. The military must have built a facility here during the Cold War. A bunker, maybe, or a research station. We need to document this. The historical significance alone could change our understanding of classified programs. The historical significance of a sealed door, with active pressure behind it, is that people died putting it here." Eli interrupted, his tone flat. "Look at the engineering. This isn't a bunker entrance. The bolts are under outward tension. This was built to contain something from the inside." He pulled the thermal imaging camera from his pack, one of Lena's scientific tools, and aimed it at the hatch. The screen showed a temperature differential that made his stomach drop. The exterior measured 0 degrees Fahrenheit, matching the ambient air. But the edges of the hatch glowed orange-red on the display, showing heat bleeding through metal 6 inches thick. "There's a heat source beyond this door," he said, showing her the screen. "Something generating enough thermal energy to warm this steel through feet of insulation and rock. That doesn't happen in abandoned facilities." Lena stared at the thermal image, her scientific certainty flickering. Could it be geothermal? A hot spring beneath the structure? There's no geothermal activity in this range. You know that. Your own surveys proved it. The wind howled, sending ice crystals slashing across their faces. The storm was building, a mountain whiteout that could trap them here for days if they didn't descend soon. Eli's survival instinct screamed to leave, to climb down while they still could, to let this mystery stay buried. But Lena's eyes held a different calculation. She'd spent 8 years pursuing her doctorate, 5 more years fighting for tenure, enduring committee reviews that questioned whether a woman could handle field research in extreme environments. This discovery, a classified military installation still active and completely unknown to modern records, could rewrite her career, could justify every sacrifice. "We have the equipment," she said quietly. "We have the expertise. This is literally what you're paid to do. Get me access to geological anomalies." Well, here it is. The anomaly. Eli looked at the hatch, then at the darkening sky. David's face flashed in his mind, surprise turning to terror as the snow wall hit him, the last moment before he vanished. Eli had hesitated then too, trying to calculate risk, trying to make the smart call. 2 hours, he said finally. We open it, we look, we document, then we leave. Storm or no storm. Agreed? Agreed. He pulled the thermal pack from his emergency kit and applied it to the hatch mechanism. The exothermic reaction sent steam hissing into the frozen air. Then he struck the locking wheel with his hammer, each impact echoing strangely, as if the mountain itself was absorbing the sound. The wheel turned. Rust screamed against metal. Ancient mechanisms that had been seized for decades suddenly remembered their purpose. The hatch slid open, not outward on hinges but inward on precision tracks, disappearing into the concrete wall with pneumatic smoothness. The air that rushed past them was wrong, sterile, chemical, dead, like the atmosphere of a sealed tomb, but temperature-controlled, maintained. Eli angled his headlamp into the darkness. A rough-hewn tunnel extended into the mountain, crude and narrow, the kind carved quickly with explosives rather than precision equipment. A secondary passage, designed to fail before the main structure. This is a failsafe, he said, recognizing the engineering philosophy. They built this tunnel to collapse if the facility was ever compromised. It's meant to bury the entrance. Then why didn't it collapse? Lena asked. Because no one triggered it, or because everyone who knew how to trigger it died inside. They stood at the threshold, feeling warm air flow past them from the depths. Somewhere inside, machinery hummed with patient, tireless rhythm. After 50 years of isolation, something was still running, still working, still containing. Eli clipped a rope to the granite wall and tied them both to the line. Stay within arm's reach. We test every step, and if I say we leave immediately. No discussion. Lena nodded, adjusting her equipment pack. They entered the mountain together, leaving the frozen daylight behind, descending into a darkness that hummed with secrets and warmth and the persistent mechanical heartbeat of a buried truth. The temperature rose with each step, not gradually but in distinct thermal layers that marked engineered climate zones. By the time they'd crawled 70 feet through the rough tunnel, the air had climbed to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Eli felt sweat dampen his thermal layers, the biological confusion of desert heat inside a frozen mountain. This is impossible, Lena whispered, checking her instruments. The energy required to maintain this temperature differential through solid rock means we're talking about industrial-scale power generation. The tunnel opened abruptly into vastness. Eli's headlamp swept across a concrete gallery that swallowed the light, easily 200 feet long and 60 feet wide, the ceiling lost in shadow 20 feet above. The space had the sterile precision of military engineering, polished concrete floors marked with faded yellow traffic lines, walls reinforced with steel I-beams, the ghost tracks of heavy machinery scored into the floor, evidence of forklifts or something larger. Above them, shattered fluorescent tubes hung like dead stalactites, their ballasts corroded into rust sculptures, but the architecture remained flawless. No cracks, no structural failure, no signs of the slow collapse that claimed all abandoned spaces. This facility had been designed to last centuries. Look at that. Lena pointed to a wall-mounted sign. The text faded but legible. It read, "Authorized personnel only. Level 4 clearance required. Project Chimera." Chimera, Eli repeated. The word carried mythological weight. A creature of mismatched parts, impossible and dangerous. Not a name you gave to a storage facility, but neither of them was looking at the sign anymore. Their attention had been captured, utterly and completely, by what dominated the far end of the gallery. The door rose 20 feet high, a perfect circle of riveted steel plate painted olive drab, the color flaking away like diseased skin to reveal layers of rust-resistant coating beneath. The surface was studded with massive bolt heads, each one thick as Eli's wrist, arranged in concentric circles around a central locking wheel. This wasn't architecture. This was a statement rendered in metal. What lies beyond must never emerge. Lena approached slowly, her hand outstretched as if drawn by magnetic force. This is a blast door, the kind used in nuclear silos or submarine pressure hulls. It's designed to contain explosive decompression from either side. Eli followed, his boots crunching on dried sealant and fragments of wood, scraps of what might have been paper, the detritus of abandonment. But the door itself showed no abandonment. The massive hinges showed fresh lubricant, dark and viscous, seeping from housing that should have been dry for decades. "Something's maintaining this," he said quietly. To the left of the central wheel, mounted in a reinforced steel frame, was an analog pressure gauge. The face was cracked but intact, brass frame oxidized to verdigris green. The dial was marked in pounds per square inch, in faded yellow numerals against black. The needle was pegged at maximum, 140 pounds per square inch. Lena's hand trembled as she pointed at the gauge. "That's not possible. No system maintains pressure that high for this long without active power. The seals alone would fail within years, maybe months. Unless the seals were over-engineered," Eli said, running his fingers along the doorframe. "And the power source was designed to outlast human memory." He pressed his ear against the cold steel, listening through 6 inches of hardened metal. For a long moment, nothing. Then he heard it. A deep, rhythmic pulse. Not random vibration, but mechanical beating. Deliberate. A heartbeat of hydraulics and pneumatics, cycling with patient, tireless rhythm. "There's a pump system," he said, pulling back. "Massive based on the frequency. It's maintaining the pressure from inside, keeping whatever atmosphere is in there contained." Lena pulled a seismic microphone from her pack, a sensitive device designed to detect subsurface faults. She placed the magnetic disc against the door and handed Eli the secondary headphones. The sound that filled his ears was magnified 1,000-fold. The pulse became a grinding roar, a noise of metal under tortuous mechanical stress. Hydraulic pistons sighed with each cycle, the sound of machinery fighting against physics itself. And beneath it all, almost hidden in the cacophony, was a high-pitched whistle, the unmistakable sound of air escaping under pressure. "Air leak," Eli said immediately, ripping off the headphones. Small, but present, the seal is failing. As if responding to his words, the gallery lights suddenly flickered. Not the dead fluorescence, but something else. Along the base of the massive door, a line of small LED indicators came to life, glowing amber in the darkness. Emergency power, activating automatically in response to system stress. One light in particular drew Eli's attention. It was positioned above a small inspection panel, and it was blinking red. He knelt beside it, using his knife to pry open the corroded panel. Inside was a mechanical readout, old technology, purely analog, the kind that couldn't be hacked or fail due to computer corruption. Etched metal dials showed primary power at 47%, backup systems active, atmospheric containment critical, and seal integrity at 67%. "Lena, look at this," he called out. She knelt beside him, her headlamp illuminating the readout. Her face went pale. "It's dying. Whatever power source is running the pump, it's at less than half capacity, and the seal integrity is below safety thresholds." "How long do we have?" Eli asked. She did quick mental calculations. At 47% power with a degrading seal, days maybe, possibly hours if there's a cascade failure. And when it fails completely, the pressure equalizes. Whatever atmosphere they sealed inside, whether it's toxic gas, biological agents, or just compressed air, it comes out. Fast. Eli stood scanning the gallery. His wilderness survival training had taught him to read environments, to see the story written in debris and damage. Here, the story was written in absence. No papers, no equipment, no personal effects. Everything had been removed deliberately, methodically. This wasn't an evacuation. This was a burial. He spotted something near the door base, a piece of wood that was waterlogged but preserved. Not driftwood, but milled lumber. He scraped away mineral deposits with his knife. Faint carpenter's pencil markings emerged. Project Chimera, Structural Integrity Level 4, dated October 19, 1968. Below that, the words, Integrity Compromised. Final seal initiated. They sealed it from inside, Eli said quietly. Whatever failed that day, they couldn't evacuate. They couldn't sterilize, so they sealed themselves in with it. The pulse of the pump continued through the concrete floor, tireless and dying. And beneath it, barely audible, came a new sound. A slow, scraping drag, metal on concrete, from deep within the chamber beyond the door. Something in there was moving. Did you hear that? Lena's voice was barely a whisper. Eli held up his hand for silence. They both stared at the massive door, listening with an intensity that bordered on pain. For 30 seconds, nothing, just the steady pulse of the pump system. Then it came again, a heavy, deliberate drag across concrete. Not the random settling of a structure under stress, but movement with intention, with direction. Lena stepped back, her scientific composure cracking. That's not machinery. No, Eli agreed. It's not. The sound stopped. In the ensuing silence, the high-pitched whistle of the air leak became suddenly, terrifyingly prominent. Eli watched the pressure gauge. The needle, which had been rock-solid at maximum, now showed a barely perceptible tremor. A vibration in time with the pump cycles, the needle shivering against the brass stop like a trapped insect. The pump is struggling, Lena said, her voice taking on the clinical detachment that scientists use to process fear. Every cycle is fighting increased resistance. The system is approaching failure threshold. Eli's mind ran through scenarios, each one worse than the last. We need to know what we're dealing with. Is there a manual override? A way to sample the atmosphere inside without breaching the seal? They searched the door frame, looking for maintenance access. The structure was designed with beautiful, terrifying simplicity. No external controls, no override panels. This was a one-way seal. Once locked, it stayed locked. Then Lena found it, near the floor. Hidden behind a heavy corroded plate was a manual valve mechanism, a wheel maybe 3 feet in diameter, connected to a complex brass housing. It was sealed with lead putty and copper wire, stamped with a faded government seal. Emergency pressure vent, Lena identified, for manual atmospheric release if the power fails completely. This is how they would have evacuated the system, or how they would have released whatever they sealed inside, Eli countered. If we open that valve, even partially, we could trigger the exact catastrophe they died preventing. Lena looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the amber emergency lights. Or we could get an air sample, analyze what's inside. If it's just compressed nitrogen or inert gas, we can safely depressurize. If it's something else, we run. It was the choice David had never gotten to make. The moment on the mountain when Eli had calculated risk and decided to push forward, and David had trusted him, and the avalanche had made the decision irrelevant. Now Eli stood at another threshold, with another person's life in his hands, facing another decision that could end in disaster. 2 hours, you said, Lena reminded him. We document and leave, but we can't document without knowing what we found. This could be radioactive material, chemical weapons, biological agents. If this seal fails and we said nothing, if we walked away and it contaminated the watershed or released something into the atmosphere, that would be on us. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Eli looked at the vent mechanism, then at Lena, then at the pressure gauge with its trembling needle. Finally, he made his choice. Not the safe choice, not the smart choice, but the choice that honored why they'd come here. We sample the air, he said, but we do it smart. We use the full hazmat protocol, and if the reading shows anything toxic or radioactive above baseline, we seal this place and call in the authorities. Agreed? Agreed. Lena pulled the air sampling kit from her pack, a specialized syringe designed for capturing atmospheric samples without contamination. Eli worked on the lead seals around the valve, the brittle metal crumbling under his multi-tools leverage. Decades of oxidation had fused the seal to the brass housing, creating a bond that required careful, patient force to break. He'd removed 3 of the 4 lead plugs when the world shifted. It wasn't an earthquake, not exactly. It was a localized tremor, a deep shudder that vibrated up through the concrete floor and into their bones, the kind of microseismic event that happens constantly in mountain ranges, usually too subtle to feel. But here, in this sealed gallery with its failing pressure system and dying pump, the tremor was enough. The amber emergency lights flickered. The pulse of the pump system stuttered, missing a single cycle. For one suspended heartbeat, the machinery stopped completely. In that silence, Eli heard the pressure gauge mechanism click. The needle, which had been trembling at maximum, suddenly dropped. Not slowly, not gradually, but in a sharp mechanical jerk that made a sound like snapping wire. It settled at 90 pounds per square inch, 50 pounds of pressure lost in an instant. "No," Lena whispered. The sound from inside the chamber changed completely. The slow, dragging scrape became frantic, rapid. Multiple sources now, moving in what sounded like concentric circles. Approaching the door. Then came the tapping, rhythmic, insistent, like fingernails on steel, or something harder. The taps moved across the door surface, following a pattern that suggested intelligence. Search behavior. Whatever was inside knew the pressure had dropped, knew the seal was failing, and it was testing the barrier. Eli grabbed Lena's arm. "We're leaving. Now." "Wait." She pulled the air sampler up to the vent valve, her hands shaking. 30 seconds, just let me get a reading." The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. Then a new noise emerged. Wet, sliding, like something massive dragging itself through viscous fluid. And underneath that, barely audible, a sound that made Eli's blood turn to ice. Breathing. Not mechanical, not hydraulic. The slow, deliberate inhalation and exhalation of something biological. Something that had been dormant, oxygen-starved, held in suspended animation by pressure and isolation. Something that was waking up. The pressure gauge needle dropped another 5 pounds. The pump system roared back to life, fighting desperately to maintain containment. But the trend was clear, irrevocable. "Lena, we're out of time." She didn't argue. She grabbed the vent wheel, trying to connect the sampler fitting. But the brass nozzle was coated in crystallized sealant, frozen solid. "I need heat," she yelled. "The torch, give me your camping torch." Eli pulled the small butane torch from his survival kit, his mind screaming at him to run, to get out, to survive. But his hands moved automatically, lighting the torch, applying the blue flame to the frozen valve fitting. As the sealant began to melt, something inside the chamber hit the door. Not a tap, not a scrape, a massive, concussive impact that shook the concrete floor and sent reverberations through the entire gallery. The sound of something heavy and desperate and immensely powerful, throwing itself against 6 inches of steel. The pressure gauge needle dropped to 70 pounds per square inch. The emergency lights turned from amber to red, and a computerized voice, ancient and crackling but still functional, echoed through hidden speakers in the gallery ceiling. "Warning, containment breach imminent. Atmospheric integrity compromised. Evacuate immediately." The mountain had just told them to run. Eli made a decision in the space between heartbeats. He grabbed Lena's shoulders, physically pulling her away from the vent valve. "We go, now. But the sample could tell us everything we need to know. It's worthless if we're dead." Another massive impact shook the door. This time, Eli saw it flex, barely perceptible, maybe a millimeter, but movement where there should have been none. Steel designed to withstand nuclear blast was bending under internal force. They ran back toward the access tunnel, their headlamps bouncing wildly across concrete and steel. Behind them, the automated warning continued its monotone loop about containment breach and evacuation protocols. They were 20 feet from the tunnel entrance when Lena stopped dead. "Wait! Are you insane? Keep moving." "The vent valve," she said, her voice suddenly calm with academic realization. "When I tried to attach the sampler, I saw something. There's a compartment built into the base housing, a dead man switch design for documentation." Eli turned, looking back at the massive door. The impacts had stopped. The breathing sound had stopped. Even the warning system had fallen silent. The gallery was suspended in pregnant, terrible quiet. If there's documentation, Lena continued, it would explain what's inside, what they sealed, why. If we're going to report this, we need context. We need evidence that people will believe. We need to survive, Eli interrupted. But even as he said it, he knew she was right. They couldn't report an unknown biological threat without information. The authorities would either dismiss it as paranoid fantasy or, worse, send in a team unprepared for what they'd find. David's face flashed in his mind again. The moment of trust before the avalanche. The choice Eli made that couldn't be unmade. This was different. This time he could see the consequences before they happened. Could choose knowledge over ignorance, responsibility over survival. 2 minutes, he said. You get the documentation. I check the tunnel for collapse risk. 2 minutes, then we're gone whether we have it or not. They ran back to the door. The pressure gauge now showed 65 pounds per square inch, and dropping slowly but steadily. Whatever had been hitting the door had stopped, not because the threat had passed, but because it was conserving energy, waiting. Lena dropped to her knees beside the vent valve. She used her knife to pry open the hidden latch in the wheelbase. A small compartment popped open, revealing a bundle wrapped in oil-soaked cloth. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a copper-bound logbook, palm-sized, its pages miraculously preserved by the sealed environment. Got it, she breathed, clutching the book to her chest like a lifeline. Eli was about to respond when the lights went out. Complete darkness. The emergency LEDs, the amber indicators, even the faint glow from the pressure gauge. Everything died simultaneously. The gallery became an absolute void, the darkness so complete it felt physical. Then, in that blackness, they heard it. The pump system had stopped. After 57 years of tireless operation, the machinery finally surrendered. The pulse that had provided constant background rhythm simply ended. The silence was more terrifying than any sound could be. Eli switched on his headlamp just as Lena did the same. Their beams cut through the darkness, finding the pressure gauge. 50 pounds per square inch, still dropping. How low before the containment fails completely? Lena couldn't finish the question. Before she could, Eli spotted something that made his stomach drop. Near the base of the door, where the steel met the concrete floor, a thin line of vapor was streaming out. Not liquid, not quite fog, but pressurized gas condensing in the warmer gallery air. The seal had broken. Run! Eli grabbed Lena's hand, pulling her toward the tunnel. Behind them, the door gave a low, grinding groan, the sound of metal under strain finally surrendering to physics. They hit the tunnel at full sprint, their headlamps barely illuminating the rough-hewn rock. The temperature dropped immediately as they left the heated gallery, sweat turning to ice on their skin. They were halfway through the 70-foot crawl when a sound erupted behind them that would haunt Eli for the rest of his life. Not mechanical, not the screech of failing metal or the rush of escaping atmosphere. It was organic, a vocalization, low frequency and resonant, carrying harmonics that suggested size and power. Not quite a roar, more like a moan, a sound of something experiencing sensation for the first time in decades. The sound of awakening. Don't look back, Eli commanded, but Lena had already turned. Her scream cut through the tunnel. Eli, look at it! He risked a glance over his shoulder. Through the tunnel opening, back in the gallery, their headlamps caught movement. Something large was emerging from the space where the door had been. The beams weren't strong enough to illuminate details, just shape, massive, low to the ground. Moving with fluid grace like something that had been compressed and constrained, and was now expanding into available space. They exploded out of the tunnel into the frozen mountain air. The whiteout had intensified, visibility reduced to 10 feet. Snow slashed horizontally, driven by winds that threatened to tear them from the mountain face. The hatch! Lena yelled over the wind. We have to seal it. Eli looked at the steel hatch they'd opened what felt like hours ago, but had only been 40 minutes. The hydraulic mechanism was still functional. If they closed it, they could buy time, trap whatever was emerging back inside the mountain. But the winds were intensifying. The temperature was dropping. They were already past safe descent thresholds. If they didn't start down immediately, They'd be trapped here, exposed, until the storm passed. Another choice. Another impossible calculation. "I'm not leaving this open," Eli said. He grabbed the hatch wheel, throwing his full weight against it. The mechanism resisted, corroded, but functional. Lena added her strength. Together, they forced the wheel to turn. The hatch began to slide closed along its track. 6 inches, 12, 18. Then it stopped. Something was blocking it from inside. Eli looked through the narrowing gap and saw what had stopped the mechanism. An appendage. Pale. Segmented. Thick as his thigh and impossibly long. It had wedged itself in the closing hatch. The surface was covered in what looked like calcified growths and atrophied sensory organs. As Eli stared, the appendage contracted, muscles that hadn't moved in decades, suddenly remembering their purpose. It was pulling itself toward the opening. "What is that thing?" Lena whispered, her voice raw with terror. Eli didn't answer. He pulled his ice axe from his belt and brought the pick down hard on the appendage. The steel bit deep. Pale fluid spurted from the wound, freezing instantly in the mountain air. The appendage spasmed and retracted. The hatch slammed shut. Eli spun the locking wheel until it couldn't turn further. For a moment they just breathed, their headlamps illuminating nothing but swirling snow. Then something hit the hatch from inside. Once, twice, a third time with force that dented the steel outward. "We need to bury it," Eli said. "The hatch won't hold. Not against that." Lena pulled the copper logbook from her pack, clutching it with both hands. "What about the information? We have evidence. We can report this to authorities who can handle it properly." "Read it," Eli interrupted. "Read it now. Then we decide what happens next." Lena opened the logbook with shaking hands, angling it toward her headlamp. Her eyes moved rapidly across the faded text. With each line, her expression changed from curiosity to horror. "They called it Specimen 5. She read aloud, her voice barely audible over the wind. "A biological experiment. Cold War-era bioweapon research. They were trying to create adaptive organisms that could survive in extreme environments. Nuclear winter scenarios. Chemical contamination zones. Deep space exploration. This one adapted too well. It started consuming everything in the facility, growing, merging with the consumed biomass. The researchers couldn't stop it, couldn't kill it. So they sealed it, used high-pressure, oxygen-free environment to force it into metabolic dormancy. How long can it survive?" Eli demanded. Lena's finger traced down the page, her hands trembling so badly she could barely read. "Indefinitely. The final entry says it's effectively immortal as long as pressure and oxygen levels remain stable. But if exposed to normal atmosphere, it begins metabolic acceleration, cellular regeneration, growth." She didn't need to finish. The impacts on the hatch were getting stronger, more rhythmic. The thing inside was learning, remembering, growing stronger with each moment of oxygenation. Eli pulled the C4 explosive from his pack. He'd carried it for 5 years, ever since avalanche conditions killed David. Emergency use only, to clear paths, to save lives. Never imagining he'd use it to bury something that should have stayed dead. "We collapse the access," he said. "Seal it permanently. Let the mountain do what the door couldn't." "But the information," Lena protested. "The world needs to know. This represents decades of classified research, war crimes possibly, medical ethics violations. We have an obligation to report this. We have an obligation to make sure that thing stays buried." Eli cut her off. "You have the logbook. That's enough. We report what was here. Let someone else decide whether to dig it back up. But right now that decision is mine, and I choose containment." Another impact. The hatch began to bow outward. Whatever was inside was seconds from breaking through. Eli didn't wait for Lena's approval. He placed the charges on the rock face above the hatch, set the timer, grabbed Lena's hand. "Run, down the slope. Don't stop, don't look back." They ran into the whiteout as the timer counted down. The explosion turned the world white, but not the white of snow. The white of overpressure, of sound so loud it became physical force. Eli felt the shockwave hit his back like a wall, throwing them both forward into the snow. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine that swallowed all other sound. He rolled onto his back, looking up through the swirling snow. Where the hatch had been was now a ragged wound in the mountain face, a crater of shattered granite and ice. But more importantly, the tunnel entrance was gone, completely sealed under tons of displaced rock. Lena sat up beside him, blood trickling from her nose from the pressure change. Her mouth moved, but Eli couldn't hear her words through the ringing in his ears. He read her lips asking if it was done, if the containment held. He nodded. Then he saw her expression change, her eyes going wide. She pointed behind him. Eli turned. The whiteout had momentarily cleared, and in that brief window of visibility, they could see the rock face, the collapsed entrance, and something else, a crack, thin, barely visible, running from the collapsed tunnel up through the granite face. Water, or something that looked like water, was seeping through the crack, viscous and pale, freezing instantly into crystalline formations. Not water, biological fluid. The thing inside was bleeding, but more terrifyingly, it was still moving, still alive, still trying to find a way out. How is that possible? Lena's voice cut through the ear ringing. The pressure should have killed it. The trauma from the explosion alone should have been catastrophic. It adapted, Eli said flatly. That's what the logbook said. It adapts, and we just gave it fresh trauma to adapt to. He pulled a thermite flare from his pack, emergency signaling equipment that burned at over 3,000 degrees. He ignited it and pressed it against the seeping crack. The biological fluid ignited, burning with an unusual greenish flame that smelled like burnt plastic and rotted meat. The seepage stopped. Whether from cauterization or retreat, Eli didn't know and didn't care. We go, he said. Now, while it's contained. The descent took 6 hours. The storm intensified, reducing visibility to arm's length. They navigated by GPS and instinct, roped together, moving in the deliberate, exhausted pace of people who've survived something that should have killed them. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say that the mountain wouldn't swallow. They reached the trailhead at dawn. The ranger station was closed. No one expected hikers in this weather. Eli's truck was buried under a foot of fresh snow, but it started on the 3rd try. They sat in the cab, heater blasting, neither speaking. Finally, Lena broke the silence. We have to report this. To who? Eli asked. The Forest Service, local police, FBI, and say what exactly? That we found a classified bioweapon facility that's been abandoned for 57 years, broke into it against every law on the books, and then buried it in an avalanche? We have the logbook, physical evidence. We have a 50-year-old journal that could be fabrication, creative fiction, or Cold War paranoia. Without the facility itself, without specimens, without verification, it's just a story. Lena clutched the copper-bound book tighter. So we do nothing? We stay silent while that thing is up there, buried under 100 feet of rock but not dead? What happens in another 50 years when the mountain shifts, when erosion exposes it, when some hiker finds it like we did? Eli looked at her, seeing David's face again. The trust, the faith that Eli would make the right choice. We survived, Lena. That's not nothing. We got out, we have information, and we sealed it better than those researchers did. The mountain will hold. You don't know that. No, he admitted, I don't. But I know that opening it again, bringing attention to it, bringing equipment and researchers and military oversight, that's how we guarantee it gets out. Secrets stay buried as long as people stop digging. They drove in silence back to the small town where they'd staged the expedition. Lena went to her motel room. Eli went to his truck, sleeping in the cab because motels felt too much like containment. The next morning, Lena was gone. Her room was empty, paid in full, no forwarding information. The copper logbook went with her. Eli waited 2 days, then drove back to the mountain. He needed to see it, to verify the seal held. The collapsed tunnel entrance showed no signs of further seepage. The thermite burn had sealed the crack. Snow had already begun filling the crater, the mountain reclaiming what had been disturbed. Within weeks, it would look like just another rock face. Within months, ice and winter would make it impassable. He stood there for an hour, watching, listening. The mountain was silent. 3 months later, Eli received a letter. No return address, postmarked from Washington, D.C. Inside was a single page from the copper logbook, photocopied, not the original. The entry was dated October 18, 1968. The final entry, below the photocopied text, a handwritten note in Lena's handwriting. It read, They're aware, can't say more, but someone is watching the site now. Someone who understands what's buried there. It wasn't for nothing, Eli. Thank you. He burned the letter that night, watching the paper curl and blacken in his campfire. He never returned to the Silent Falls, never guided in that range again. But sometimes, late at night, he would wake from dreams of trembling needles and breathing darkness, and wonder if the mountain still held its secret, and wonder what would happen when it finally let go. 10 years later, Eli sat in a ranger station in a different mountain range, different state, different life. He'd taken a permanent position with the Forest Service, desk work mostly, training new search and rescue personnel. Quiet, safe, predictable. The news played on the old television in the corner. Something about seismic activity in Idaho. Minor tremor, barely noticeable. The Clearwater Range. Eli stood walking to the window. The mountains beyond were peaceful, snow-capped, and eternal. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Eli Vance? A woman's voice. Official. Federal. Yeah, this is Dr. Lena Novak. It's been a while. I'm calling to let you know that the site you and I visited together experienced some seismic activity yesterday. Nothing significant. The containment appears stable. Appears? It's holding, she said. For now. But Eli, there are 6 other sites. From the same project, we're finding them. Slowly, not all of them are sealed as well as ours. Our site. As if they owned it. As if the secret belonged to them. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because you made the right choice 10 years ago, Lena said. And I need people who understand that some doors should stay closed. Some secrets should stay buried. But someone needs to watch. Someone needs to be the vigil. Eli looked at the mountains. Thought about David. About choices. About the weight of knowledge and the burden of silence. I'll think about it, he said. He never called back. But he never stopped watching the mountains either. Because some choices aren't made once and forgotten. Some choices echo through decades, through careers, through lives built on the foundation of what you decided when everything hung in the balance. Eli had chosen silence, had chosen containment, had chosen to let the mountain keep its secret, and every day since he wondered if that choice would hold, or if one day the mountain would speak, and the world would finally hear what should have stayed buried in the frozen darkness behind the waterfall. And if you liked this story, please share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Eli's position? Let me know. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.